So I'm going to announce the next panel. It's about marine nature-based solutions. So it's a very interesting panel about the importance of marine forests. With you on stage is Ian Packer. Ian? Stage is yours.
Grazie. Thank you very much. Grazie, Melangela. So this panel, the topic of this panel is very close to us as One Ocean Foundation. We're talking about marine forests and the importance of marine forests, and we'll also have the opportunity to present one of our projects. And so I'm happy to introduce the panel and the panelists up here with me on stage. So we start with Carlos Duarte. You've seen him already before. We're happy to have you here. Thank you, Carlos. Distinguished Professor of the KAUST University. Thank you. Next we have Vincent Doumeizel. Vincent is Senior Advisor on the Oceans at the United Nations. Vincent, great to have you here. Thank you. And Giulio Magni, Operations Director at the One Ocean Foundation. So, gentlemen, let's start with Carlos. Huge specialist on anything that has to do with CO2 sequestration, blue carbon, and we had many talks already on the importance of seagrass, seaweed. And so let me start with the first question on what can you tell us about the importance of marine forests in general, as specific terms, but on biodiversity, climate change, in particular. We heard already something in the talks before, but maybe let's deep dive into that.
Thank you, Jan. So we do have significant forest in the ocean, not just on land. We're very well aware of the forest on land, but we're still on a discovering path to discover the extent and also significance of marine forest. So basically, marine forests come in 3 or 4 different forms. So there are mangroves, which are coastal forests that are trees, so they're very easy to recognize as forests. Then salt marshes as well, that tend to be herbaceous species that grow in the intertidal zone. So it's a class of forest. Then we go underwater, and then we find seagrass, like Posidonia, where I've done a lot of work in Posidonia in the Mediterranean. And then they look like grass, but in fact, seagrass, particularly Posidonia, is more like a tree lying on the side than a grass. I will come back to Posidonia a little bit later when I explain marine forest. And then we have another class of forest, which are seaweed or macroalgae. And those are highly diverse, so there's more than 700 species. For seagrass, we only have about 70 species, so compared to 350,000 species of higher plants on land, only 60 of them were able to colonize the ocean. But we have a lot of seaweed, in fact 7,000, not 700 species, and they come in different forms: brown, green, red, and some of them are very large, so some of them can reach about 14 to 20 meter tall. And we recently published the first assessment of the global extent of algal-based forests, and we calculated that algal-based forests occupy about 7 million square kilometers of ocean space, which is actually about the same extent of the Amazonia. So we have an Amazonia in the ocean made of algae, but rather than be like a compact object, it's actually riveting the margins of the continents as a ribbon. But if we take that ribbon and put it all together, it's 7 million square kilometers, and the contribution to primary productivity is equivalent to that of the Amazon as well. So we were not just realizing how much forest we have underwater, and for instance, we have large expanse of such forest in Antarctica that we're still discovering and mapping. So coming back to the higher plants, which are salt marshes, seagrass, and mangroves, then we did research, not myself alone, but along with other colleagues in basically the 1990s, that we discovered that these forests are actually the most intense carbon sinks in the biosphere. So that finding that they have a very important role in sequestering carbon was eventually the basis to formulate the blue carbon concept and the strategy to invest in avoiding the loss of this forest and restore much of the area that we lost to be able to mitigate climate change. So these forests that are on the shore, that are seagrass, mangroves, and salt marshes, do not just sequester carbon. They're also very important for fisheries. So about half of the global fisheries depend on this forest, on some stages of the animals that live in this forest. So very important for food security, but play a fundamental role in coastal defense and shoreline protection. In fact, we are publishing now work done in the Balearic Islands, so in Mallorca, Ibiza, Menorca, Formentera, where we calculate that if we were to lose the Posidonia meadows in the Balearic Islands, then the damage with sea level rise and climate change to coastal infrastructure and beaches will be 80 times more than in the presence of the Posidonia. So they play a strong role in coastal defense. But Posidonia is really an amazing plant. It's unique compared to other forests. So I'm going to dwell in Posidonia because it's the one we have nearby and the one that One Ocean is quite adequately focusing efforts on. So we discovered some years ago between Ibiza and Formentera a Posidonia clone because they grow clonally. So they grow clonally and reach very large sizes. That was basically the size of Manhattan. So it was about 10 kilometers in length, that plant. And then we calculated that the seed that gave rise to this plant reached the seafloor and germinated 200,000 years ago. So they're impressively long-lived, the longest-lived organism in the planet, and they play a very fundamental role in the ecosystem, and yet most people that swim on Posidonia or seagrass meadows, they think it's just grass. And in 2009, I published a paper where I nicknamed seagrass at the time as the ugly ducklings of the ocean, because back then, not even NGOs care about seagrass. Now, this has changed. There is increasing recognition of the importance of forest, and we are now in a discovery path of the importance of the blue Amazon, which is the seaweed forest, and we just published a paper in a journal called Nature Geoscience last week, where we calculated that they contribute about 15% of the carbon sequestration in the ocean. So we're still learning, amazing. But definitely the forests in the oceans are fundamentally important.
I think the numbers are pretty amazing, and I'm not sure how many people are aware of this impact and what we have actually happening as alliance to fight climate change. If I'm not mistaken, I heard a TED talk, and I think of you, and it's also, there's like proper reefs of Posidonia deposits, also like 15 meters of sea mats. Like
yeah. So we, well, that is not really my research, but colleagues were able to take a very long course using geophysical techniques in Port Llegat, which is the bay in Catalonia where Dalí had his summer house, and they were able to drill down 11 meters, and that is a continuous presence of Posidonia in 11 meters, so that's about 8,000 years of continuous growth raising the seafloor.
And 8,000 years of depositing carbon.
Depositing carbon, and even a record of even Roman industry at the time. There's not only the carbon, but there's an archive of human history inside that archive.
Impressive. Thanks very much. Vincent, I'll start off with wishing you a happy Seaweed Day. I just found out that 4th of June is Happy Seaweed.
It is indeed.
Okay.
Happy Seaweed Day to you as well.
Okay. So before you brought it up, maybe Vincent published a book, and that got me really passionate about the seaweed topic and the whole culture and history and where it came from and the importance it could also play in the future. So, why don't you tell us a bit about the importance and what drove you in that book?
Well, we're talking about a revolution from my point of view. If we do it well, there's one region in the world, Asia, that is really leveraging on the production of seaweed. But that's only one region, and we're talking about 40 million tons of seaweed cultivated every year, but it's just in Asia. So we may wonder why only one region decided to use a resource that does not need land, does not need pesticide, and guess what? You don't even need to water a seaweed to grow. So that's quite cool. And I think it's highly needed now to move to that revolution. Just like we had a revolution back 12,000 years ago when we stopped being hunters-gatherers and became farmers, but that was just on land. We moved away from prehistory, we entered into civilization, but that was just on land. Right. We are still hunters-gatherers in the ocean. We are still, fishing is nothing but hunting, and outside of Asia, we are just collecting wild seaweed. And in the meantime, we have 1 billion people starving, and we have the food systems that are contributing to the biggest, that are the biggest contributor to the global warming, biodiversity loss, water scarcity, soil depletion, and so forth. And in the meantime, 70% of this planet is covered by ocean that contribute to less than 2% of our food. So it's kind of crazy if you think about it. So it's time to become civilized with the ocean, take some learnings from what we did on land, and build something really regenerative, right, supporting ecosystem, supporting carbon absorption, and providing resources to coastal community where fisheries will disappear. I mean, fishing activities will disappear. So that's a real revolution, the systemic revolution, but with a lot of potential, actually.
I think also on the social level, because, I mean, looking through the book, you went through all different regions, Asia, Africa, and you see also in underdeveloped countries that there's an actual opportunity also for women. Maybe you want to get some examples going.
Exactly. If you look at what happened in Africa, for instance, in Zanzibar, Zanzibar is a fantastic story. I mean, back 30 years ago, Zanzibar is still a Muslim, patriarchal, and very traditional country. Women were locked at home. They had no authorization to go out of to get out of home. They were not at school. They were not in the marketplace, and so forth. And then came the seaweed industry, and for some reasons, they benefited from that seaweed industry. They were the only one involved in the seaweed industry, and now the seaweed industry in Zanzibar is the third biggest revenue for the island. 80% of these revenues goes to women. You can see women everywhere in Zanzibar outside. They have built schools for their girls, for the kids, girls, in Zanzibar, and now the president of Tanzania is a woman from Zanzibar. So things have changed a lot over the last 30 years, notably because of seaweed, which generate resources and revenues in coastal communities in a very, very inclusive way. And we see sort of the same kind of thing in Indonesia, for instance, which was severely hit by COVID. And of course, Bali, touristic activities went very much down, and a lot of people moved to seaweed cultivation and make some revenues out of it. So there's a very strong and compelling story, which is why United Nations is so interested. Not only it provide a source of food for human beings, a source of animal feed for animal, a source of biostimulants to replace fertilizers, a very good solution to replace plastic, to replace other unsustainable material, repair the ocean, as stated by Carlos, sequester carbon, but also a source of revenue. So it's a multifaceted solution, and I think we all need a lot of solution. And my passion around seaweed is really like a kind of an intergenerational commitment. You know, I have 3 kids, and I think I'm really fed up to talk to the next generation with fears and drama. Right. Feed them with fears and drama. We need to feed them with hopes and optimism. Seaweed may well be the greatest untapped resource we have on the planet, and it's time to share the story.
Absolutely. I think our look towards plants should really be one of the main messages on land and also underwater. But also the growth rate is amazing. I mean, some of these algae have amazing growth rates that you can't even find on any land-based plant.
Yeah, well, 40 centimeters a day, except with some bamboo, you will not find anything comparable. I mean, the Macrocystis pyrifera, which are in the South Pacific, they can grow very, very fast. And other type of 40 centimeters a day is quite
it's
massive. So there's some great project, notably in Africa, in Namibia notably, which is using this type of seaweed to grow the biggest seaweed farm in the world at scale. at scale, it is supposed to absorb as much greenhouse gas as the entire emission from Netherlands once it will be up and running, full scale. So far, they have started. They are growing seaweed and they dry it for free on the beach. So it's really a very, very strong potential for Africa.
The stories are all super positive. What are the challenges? I mean, what dangers is seagrass and seaweed? There's a difference, right? Seagrass, seaweed, or underwater forest. What are the challenges today? I mean, over the past 50, 60 years, I think there was a big drop also on what you could see from the various dangers that we see in the ocean, the various pressures.
Yeah, so seagrass have been lost in many areas of the world. The first big loss, which happened in the Atlantic, happened in the 1930s. There was something called the wasting disease, induced by a unicellular organism that eroded the epidermis of the seagrass and led to massive losses in both sides of the Atlantic. And in some areas, they have not yet recovered. So still recovering from that huge impact. And then following that, as they were starting to recover, then we have massive losses due to impacts on water quality, due to massive runoff for nutrients from urban environments, but also from excess fertilizers that were eventually reaching the ocean from rivers. And then a third driver of loss of seagrass has been also mechanical impacts from trawling, from also coastal infrastructure development projects, and anchoring and other physical impacts that have led to seagrass loss. So up to around 2000, year 2000, so at the end of the turn of the century, we calculated that we had lost about 60% of the global seagrass area. But then something has happened, and then that since we've seen the same for mangroves as well. So the global extent of marine forest reached a minimum around year 2000, and since we are in a recovery pathway. So in the first decade of this century, we calculated that for the first time we have a net gain of seagrass in Europe, and that was actually a consequence of the Water Framework Directive implementation that had seagrass as an ecological quality indicator. So all EU countries were mandated to have seagrass in good health state, and that forced to implement nutrient treatment and sewage treatment plants in many cities. Just think that Brussels, which is kind of a political capital of Europe, was releasing raw sewage to the river until 2007 or 8. So then a lot of progress has been made in mitigating the impacts of water quality that have allowed seagrass to come back. And that is along with restoration projects, which have enabled seagrass to regrow in many areas of Europe. So that is not just Europe. North America is also seeing a rebound of seagrass, and we're seeing the same in Japan, China, and Australia. So for many other countries, we don't have time trajectories, but mangroves are no longer globally declining. They're now recovering, and so are seagrass. So because we now are aware of the value of the forest of the ocean and then investing in recovering those oceans. So that's on the wild forest. On the seaweed, I concur with Vincent, Vincent, that seaweed farming is actually the next step in feeding the world, not only sustainably, but also regeneratively, because seaweed farming is a regenerative enterprise. So right now there's only about 2,000 square kilometers of seaweed farming globally, and that compares to 50 million square kilometers of land that we have modified for food production. So the whole scope for the growth of seaweed aquaculture goes from 2,000 square kilometers at present to possibly about 3 million square kilometers while still being regenerative. And they're regenerative because they sequester carbon, they remove excess nutrients from the water, they also provide habitat, so biodiversity increases around seaweed farms, and also then they, by taking up carbon dioxide from the water, then they also provide local refugia from ocean acidification. Mm-hmm. And they're also regenerative to communities, and they are regenerative to us because we are now starting to realize the major health benefits of a seaweed component to our diet. So now there's emerging results that show very low prevalence of Alzheimer and also other mental diseases when the seaweed diet is significant in our diet. The highest of all is the diet of Japan. And for us, seaweed farming is a new thing. But the first legal code that regulates the use of ocean space for seaweed farming is actually from the 7th century in Japan. And one of the farms that I work with, which is in Tokyo Bay, has been in continuous operation for 350 years. And yet now in the Western world, we're starting to think that we discovered seaweed. So they've been there, and they have been supporting health benefits for us, particularly important for mental well-being and mental health, and also coronary health. So regenerative for the ocean and regenerative for us.
Thank you very much. Amazing stories, especially on opportunities. I want to come back just 1 second, but I want to give the floor to Giulio to tell us about some projects of the One Ocean Foundation and also the partners that we involve in that. It's not on seaweed, it's seagrass, it's Posidonia oceanica. Giulio.
Yeah, thanks to Carlos and to other members of our scientific committee, we realized last year that we had to do something on this topic. We didn't know how was precious this ecosystem for the environment, for the society, but also for economical reasons. So we decided to launch a strategic project on this topic. And as all of our projects, of course, we have to face complexity since the problem is very complex. So we need the help of our scientific committee since all the projects are scientific based. And we realized that we needed to collect data, collect information, collect evidences on how these ecosystems are valuable and need to be promoted in the right way. So we started to understand how to do that and what kind of stakeholders to involve on these projects, on these activities. And we started with universities, not only in Italy, but also abroad. We started with our scientific committee for sure, and we wanted to find global company leaders. As we saw this morning, we have Rockwool, for instance, on board on this. We have Pirelli as well. Nivea, with Nivea, I launched a project in Puglia this last week, and many others are coming on board on this topic. So we need to create a network that will allow us to move from a local scale to a global perspective. Since for sure we started in Mediterranean Sea working with Posidonia oceanica, but it's not enough.
Right.
We need to promote a message globally since the marine forests are a global asset. So we need, as Carlos said before, to spread awareness how they are important and how we have so many different species. We don't just have Posidonia oceanica. I think we have around 70 species just of seagrass, if I'm not wrong. So our mission is to make people around the globe aware of this and to promote technologies, innovations, and methods to protect them and to restore them, since the restoration it's quite relevant as well.
And especially,
I think we have a video also on a campaign we are going to promote from now to in the next few days that want to underline how it's important to consider our seabed like we consider the lands. So as we want to do reforestation activities on lands, we need to promote reforestation activities underwater as well, below the water.
Should we launch a video so we can have a look? Thanks very much. So this is it's an open call for any of the companies who want to start to invest in this. I think we need it. And I think we just have to realize that this is particularly important to coastal areas because seagrass and seaweed, it's up to a depth of maximum 40 meters.
Yeah, so seagrass, Posidonia, and in fact, coming back to the companies, congratulations to One Ocean for the initiative. But if the companies are searching for legacy, as I mentioned before, if you plant properly Posidonia clone, you may have a legacy for up to 200,000 years. So what is that for legacy? So please join One Ocean on that project.
Maybe we can add that on the information.
Yes, that's right. But the Posidonia grows to about 45-meter depth. But then we have the deepest record of seagrass is down to 80 meters, small one called Halophila in the Caribbean. But then seaweed can grow really deep. So the deepest record of seaweed is about 380 meters. And they, in Greenland and
it still
Antarctica...
uses the photosynthesis.
Yes, still photosynthesis. They are extremely efficient, not plants, but organisms. And then in Greenland and Antarctica, kelp can grow down to about 80, 90, 100 meters. And in the Mediterranean, we have a kelp called Laminaria rodriguezi that is actually beyond the reach of scuba diving because it requires very cold waters consistently to be able to grow. Very few people have seen it. In the Mediterranean, you probably need a submersible. So that's how deep they grow.
So when we talk about the dangers of what we have to watch out is, for example, bottom trawling would be absolutely...
Yes. So they're vulnerable to activities that are impacting on the seafloor. But I'd like to share off a script. I'd like to share something that is entirely kind of off a script, but something that I found inspiring and is not my research. So I've done I was thinking about being in the water and looking at the seagrass, but often when I'm on algal forest, I've done about 3,000 dives. My institution no longer wants me in the water because I'm turning 64 and they think I'm too old to be scuba diving for work. But I've done about 3,000 dives and often in algal forest. And then in many of them, I heard something that I thought it was my ears because of the pressure, something like a scintillating sound, like little bells, cling, 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 cling. And consistently, I heard that in many algal forests. I had no idea what it was. I thought it was something with the pressure of my ears until about 5 years ago, then researchers, not me, published what it is. So this is the sound of photosynthesis of algal forest. So when you are scuba diving in Posidonia and other algal forests, you often see them covered by bubbles in the surface, when those bubbles, which are oxygen, and then we heard about the importance in oxygen production by these meadows. So when these bubbles reach a critical size, they detach and become buoyant, and they raise towards the surface. Wow. So if this happens deep enough, as they raise and the pressure decreases, then they increase in size. And at one point, the size becomes too much for the bubble stability, and it bursts. So this bursting of one bubble produces that scintillating sound, but you have hundreds of thousands of bubbles breaking in the water and making this concert of Giuseppe Verdi based on little bells. So those of you who are scuba divers or can even have a hydrophone in the water, keep alert for that scintillating sound. This is how productive these marine forests are.
Wow, amazing. Thank you for that story. Thank you for sharing this. Vincent, I think you brought us something in your bag. You wanted to show us some...
No, yeah, I just wanted to reiterate on the challenges. I mean, one of the big challenges really also domesticating seaweed and creating a market for seaweed. And in this, we are all the drivers of the change because each time we eat and we drink, we vote for the world we want somehow. Eating seaweed is already a very good start to support this industry, to grow up and so forth. And then we need the next generation to get interested. We need much more people like Carlos. We need more Carlos Duarte on this planet to domesticate the ocean because we have studied land plants and crops for 12,000 years and we are just starting with seaweed. We know how to cultivate 20 seaweed out of thousands of them, so 10,000-ish. So yeah, there's still a lot to do about it, and indeed, because it's Seaweed Day, and because I fully concur with Carlos that we need to stop with storytellers and promote story doers.
Yeah.
So I wanted to share with you. I'm often challenged with the fact that plastic pollution is a big deal. So here we have some plastic made out of seaweed. So we have typically this is a plastic film made out of seaweed. I have a funny one here, which is a plastic. This is olive oil wrapped in seaweed. So basically, this packaging here outside is seaweed. So if you go and go for a picnic, you will open your olive oil. It's Italian one, I'm sure. Pour it in your salad, and then when you're done with the olive oil, you can throw it away because it's compostable, biodegradable, and you can even eat it because it's edible. And
Okay.
And because it's a Seaweed Day, and because I say that the big challenge, there's another very unsustainable resource on the planet, which is unknown, but we are in Italy, which is the country for fashion. So I wanted to share that with you, and because it's a launch event today. Cotton, synthetic fibers are, of course, very bad because they release plastic in the ocean. Cotton is very bad as well because it takes a lot of water, 4,000 liters for one T-shirt, and cotton is 2% of the cultured land, 25% of the pesticide used worldwide, and 10% of the herbicide. So today, this very day, a foundation, another one, is releasing a T-shirt made from seaweed, actually, which is sold for the profit of research in seaweed. So in order to understand how to develop seaweed cultivation. So this is ocean-born lifestyle. So this seaweed T-shirt is made from seaweed, actually, you see, replacing cotton, because anything you do with land plant, you can do it with seaweed. I'm often asked, what can you do with seaweed? And you can do many different things. We have to remember that from an evolutionary perspective, the first living organism on the planet were complex living organisms were red and green seaweed. Green seaweed moved on land 500 million years ago, creating the entire biodiversity, plant biodiversity you see. So today, a green seaweed is genetically much closer to an oak tree or to a strawberry than it is to a red seaweed. And from an evolutionary perspective and a genetic perspective, red seaweed is more different to green seaweed than a fungi is to an elephant. So you can really do a lot.
So can you eat the T-shirt when you are done?
Yeah, you can. I have only one, so I will keep it.
Okay. Thank you very much, Vincent. Giulio, lessons learned so far, basically from our experience. I think it's the past 2 years.
Yeah, I think that as I said, we started in the Mediterranean Sea, and we have launched a collaboration with Halifax universities in the last few days. But I think that there's a lot to do, and the most relevant challenge probably to me is to find technologies and best ways to, talking about restoration, to move to a different speed, because right now it's very demanding, it's very expensive to do restoration, especially considering Posidonia oceanica. So if we want to restore Posidonia or other seagrass in a much more effective and faster way, we need to find technologies, cheaper technologies. We need to find funds. We need to find global players that believe and want to generate impact on that. So we are happy to create a network on this. And thanks to Carlos and to events like this, we want to spread the voice that we need the activation of multi-stakeholders and global players on this topic.
Exactly, and also implement best practices. Maybe there are some examples that you know because you've been around globally. Maybe there's some methods that we could use and we can pick up and work on. So I think it should be a global platform and learning from each other. That's one of the things I got through the book also of Vincent. Carlos, you want to add something as well?
So we heard that seaweed farming is regenerative. And that is a word that we have been hearing throughout the whole day, regenerative, right? And we are now then thinking that we're in a transitional paradigm from sustainability to regenerative action. So I wanted to reflect a bit on why this is important and what regenerative really means. So sustainability is not a collection of stamps, it's SDG 1, 2, 3, 4, 17. It really means the need for one generation to access resources without compromising the access to resources of future generations. That's really what it means. And then the other one are kind of tools to achieve that, right? But that is the essence of what it means. So last year, I had an event in the UN General Assembly, Climate Week, where I started by declaring that during my lifespan, so I mentioned I'm already 64, then we have lost 50% of the natural capital that we lost happened during my lifespan. 50% of the documented extinctions have happened during my lifespan, and 50% of the cumulative greenhouse gas emissions have happened during my lifetime. So I cannot look in the eye of my grandson Oliver and tell him I'm being sustainable. I can't. So we have broken the contract. We are not handing over to the future generations a planet that is able to support their needs and well-being. So we need to be regenerative. And now we have regenerative enterprises, regenerative aquaculture, regenerative agriculture, regenerative tourism, regenerative architecture. And what that means really is an action that strives at creating and growing economic capital, social capital, cultural capital, and natural capital. So this is what regenerative is, and then seaweed farming is an epitome of a regenerative action.
Thank you very much. I think, Vincent, we also...
Yeah, I have a problem with the word sustainable. Indeed, I think we should move to regenerative. Sustainable is a 20th century word, because when you have someone, we have destroyed the ocean, and when you have someone in an hospital in ICU, in a very serious situation, you don't talk about sustaining him. You want to regenerate him. And I think that's what we should do with the ocean. And I'd like to give a call here because we are in Italy. And I think when I talk to seaweed, human beings were fueled by seaweed. We know that the massive growth of our brain over history, moving from apes to sapiens, was fueled by eating a lot of seaweeds, which have very, very specific fatty acids. And we somehow lost that connection 12,000 years ago, right here. Right here in the Med region, someone called Virgil stated, nihil vilior algae, nothing is vilest than algae. And it's really around the Mediterranean region, not only the Roman, but also the Greek and the Mesopotamia and so forth, they develop agriculture and they remove seaweed from history. We may imagine that because the Med Sea is complicated for seaweed, the development of large cities with no cleaning system generated some big invasive species and so forth. So really, the Romans have a responsibility somehow, and they went all around the world and removed seaweed from history. And the only place in the world that was not colonialized by the European culture in the 19th century was Japan. And that's the only place where they still eat seaweed massively. So I think there's something to do with Italy too.
We have a lot of Roman culture today. Between Carlos and yourself, we get a history lesson. So thank you very much. I think we are already over with the time. Whoever is interested, you're launching your book also in the Italian version tonight. So it's an important day. And thank you all for being here. I think it's a message of hope, especially to Italy that has 8,000 kilometers of coastline.
Exactly.
That have a huge potential, especially looking at the south and the strategic positioning in the Mediterranean. So talking about hope and future opportunities, I think there's a lot. Thank you very much.